She was the most beautiful woman in the Niger Delta, and her beauty was not a gift. It was a trap, built at midnight, sealed with her blood, and set for the richest man who would ever look at her.
She was 19 years old the night her father dragged her to the shrine. Her name was Adana, and she had done nothing wrong. Her father, Nosu, was a cassava farmer drowning in debt. 3 failed harvests, a leaking roof, a son too young to work, a wife already buried. When a man is desperate enough, he stops hearing his own conscience. The native doctor sat in the dark with his back to the fire. He did not turn when they entered. He only said, and his voice was the kind of voice that made the lizards on the wall freeze, "Bring her forward." Adana's father pushed her by the shoulders. She stumbled to her knees on the clay floor. She could feel things watching her from the corners of the room, things that had no eyes. The agreement was spoken slowly, like a man reading a death sentence. The native doctor would make her irresistible, not beautiful in the ordinary way, but the kind of beautiful that breaks a man's reason, the kind that makes a rich man forget his caution and spend everything he has just to own her. In return, when the highest bride price ever paid in that region fell at her feet, a spirit would enter the marriage with her, silent, invisible, patient. It would begin by draining the husband's wealth, then his health, then his life. And everything that man had built over a lifetime would transfer quietly to Nosu's family. Adana screamed. She begged. She told her father she would rather starve. Her father wept. His hands shook. And then he held her down. The native doctor cut her right palm with a blade the color of charcoal. He pressed strange herbs into the wound, and he whispered the final words of the covenant over her bleeding hand. The moment the words were finished, Adana felt something cold pour into her chest, something that was not her, something that had been waiting for a body to live inside. She was no longer just a girl. She was a vessel, and she had to watch herself become beautiful and know that every man who looked at her was looking at his own destruction. His name was Chief Obinna Maduabuchi, 41 years old, oil contractor, twice divorced, rich enough that his name arrived in a room before he did. When he saw Adana at a village ceremony, he did not think about consequences. He thought about ownership. He arrived at her father's compound with 20 cars, 6 live cows, and bundles of cash that made the village elders cover their mouths. The kola knot was broken, and the last note of cash was counted. Adana felt it happen, like a door slamming shut inside her chest. The spirit stirred and smiled. She looked down at the ground the entire ceremony. She let the tears fall. Everyone thought she was overcome with joy. Nobody knew she was saying goodbye to herself.
The mansion was beautiful. Marble floors, a pool that glowed blue at night, servants who bowed when she passed. Adana moved through all of it like a woman walking through someone else's dream. She barely ate. She never laughed. When Obinna touched her, she would close her eyes and go somewhere far away in her mind, back to the village, back to a boy named Emeka who used to bring her palm fruit and call her by her full name like it was a prayer. A boy her father had chased away the moment the covenant began. Obinna told himself she was just shy, a village girl adjusting. But something in his gut knew the truth before his mind was ready to accept it. By the second month, his business deals, which used to close like locked doors, began sticking. Delays, losses he could not explain. His doctor told him his blood pressure was the worst she had seen in a man his age. He was being eaten, slowly, from the inside. The moral test came on a Wednesday night. His personal assistant, a sharp young man named Kalechi, came to him with evidence. "Chief, I have been investigating. There is something very wrong in this house. Something is attached to Madame. I have a dibia who is willing to come and separate it quietly. You will not even need to tell her. She will never know." Obinna sat with that offer for a long time. He could end this quietly, protect himself, take the action of a man who only cared about his own survival. He said no. If something is wrong in my house, we will face it together. I am not a man who solves problems by keeping secrets. He did not know in that moment that his decision had been noted. Not by Kalechi, by something older. He came home from a 2-week trip to find Adana on her knees beside the bed, whispering in a language he had never heard, hands shaking, tears streaming, fingernails dug so deep into her own palms that both hands were bleeding. When she saw him, she tried to hide it. She forced that small, obedient smile. "My husband, welcome back." But Obinna had seen her eyes before she could hide them. And in those eyes was not the look of a wife who was happy to see her husband. It was the look of a prisoner who had just realized her sentence would never end. He sat beside her on the floor. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply said, "Tell me everything." It took her 2 hours to speak. Every word came out like pulling a thorn from deep inside her throat. When she finished, Obinna sat in silence for a long time. His hands were trembling, not from anger, from fear. Because he had already felt it, the tiredness that no amount of sleep could fix, the wealth that kept bleeding away despite every good deal he made, the strange cold that had settled into his chest sometime around month 2 and never fully left. The spirit had already started feeding. The fear test was this. Now that he knew the truth, what would he do with it? Would he run from the fire or walk toward it? Obinna announced that he was returning to the village. He told no one else. He and Adana would go together. But the night before they left, something happened that changed everything. Kelechi came to him again. This time he was not offering help. This time his face was the face of a man confessing. "Chief, I have to tell you something. The dibia I mentioned, he was not just someone I found. Your father-in-law paid me 3 months ago to bring you to that dibia. Not to break the covenant, to make sure you never found out about it. The plan was for you to visit the dibia, receive a spiritual cleaning, and leave believing you were protected, while the spirit continued feeding undisturbed. I refused, but Chief, I think someone else accepted the job." The silence that followed was heavier than the darkness. Obinna looked at Adana. Adana looked back. "My husband," she whispered, "I swear on my mother's grave, I did not know." He studied her face for a long time. Every line, every trembling breath. The deception test was this. In a world where everyone around him had lied or been used as a weapon against him, did he still have the capacity to choose to believe someone? He reached across the space between them and took her bleeding hand.
He said, I believe you. Now come, we end this tonight.
They arrived at dawn. Nwosu saw his son-in-law's face and knew the time for pretending was finished. The native doctor was summoned. He came unhurried, still wearing his power like a garment. He looked at Obinna the way a man looks at something he has already decided is already dead. You cannot break what the gods have tied, he said. Go back to your city chief. Die in a comfortable bed. That is the mercy I offer you. Obinna did not flinch. The gods, he said quietly, did not tie this. You did, with a frightened farmer's desperation and a 19-year-old girl's blood. He reached into his agbada and brought out a white kola nut. The night before, in secret, he had traveled 3 hours to find the oldest dibia in the region, a man so feared by other spiritual workers that even the native doctor's eyes flickered when he recognized the wrapped kola nut's markings. The old dibia told him, you cannot fight a covenant with anger. Anger feeds it. You can only dissolve it with the one thing no dark covenant can survive, the free choice of the soul that was taken without consent. He gave Obinna the kola nut and one instruction. Let her choose in front of everyone. Let her say the words herself. Obinna turned to Adana. He spoke not as a husband, not as the man who paid the highest price. He spoke as one human being to another. Adana, you were taken to that shrine without your permission. You were caught without your consent. You were sold into this covenant before you were old enough to understand what was being done to you. I cannot break what was done to you. Only you can. In front of all these people, your father, this man, every ancestor watching tonight, I am asking you, do you renounce this covenant? Not for me, for yourself. The compound went so quiet that people heard the heartbeat of the person standing next to them. Adana was shaking. Her father was crying. The native doctor took one step forward. And then Adana raised her right hand and she spoke. I was Adana Nwosu before any of you made me into something else, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying to every corner of the compound. I renounce this covenant in the name of my mother who is buried behind this house, in the name of the girl I was before that shrine. I am not a vessel. I am not a transaction. I am not a sacrifice. I am free. The native doctor lunged forward. Obinna broke the kola nut. What happened next, the elders would argue about for years. Some said they saw a shadow leave Adana's body, something dark and shapeless that screamed without a sound. Some said they only felt a pressure change in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. The native doctor fell to the ground. He did not die. He woke minutes later, blinking like a man who remembered who he used to be before greed filled the space where his conscience once lived. His powers were gone. He would spend the rest of his life as an ordinary man, which for someone who had built his identity on the fear of others was the worst punishment possible. But the real twist, the one that broke the village's silence into gasps, was what happened to Nwosu. The debts he had sold his daughter to clear, they remained, every single one. The covenant had promised him wealth at the cost of his son-in-law's life, but the covenant was now broken. Nothing transferred, nothing cleared. Adana walked to her father.
She stood before the man who held her down at the shrine, the man who cried while betraying her, the man who tried to have her husband deceived as even Obinna was trying to save her. And she knelt before him. Not in submission, not in forgiveness that he had earned. She knelt in grief for a man who loved her and still destroyed her, for the poverty that taught her that a daughter's body was a resource to be spent. She said, "I do not hate you, Father, but I cannot save you from what you chose. That you will carry alone." She stood up, turned to Obinna, and for the first time in their entire marriage, she looked directly into his eyes. Not with gratitude, not with fear, with something that was just beginning and might, with time, become love. 9 months later, Adanna gave birth to a daughter. They named her Uzo. It means the way forward. Obinna's business did not just recover, it grew. Not because the curse was broken, but because a man who learned to choose mercy over ownership builds differently than a man who only knows how to possess things. And every year, on the anniversary of that night in the village, Obinna and Adanna sat their daughter down and told her the full story. Not the comfortable version, the real one, with the bleeding palms and the midnight shrine and the father who wept while betraying his child. And they always ended it the same way. My children, the fire has burned down to embers now. The night is watching. But before you go, I need you to answer something for me. When Obinna stood in that compound and could have turned back, could have said, "I paid for a wife, not a war," he chose the war anyway. And in doing so, he discovered something that no amount of bride price can ever buy. A woman who stays not because she was purchased, but because she was seen. Tell me, my children, if you were standing in that compound, knowing the spirit was still inside her, knowing the native doctor was watching, knowing your own life was the cost, would you have broken that kola knot? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story touched something deep in you tonight, let the fire know. Like, share, subscribe, so we can keep telling the stories that make the ancestors sit up straight. Sleep well, my children, but never forget, some bride prices are paid in cash, others are paid in blood, silence, and years. And the rarest currency of all is the courage to release what you thought you owned.